Hey, so today I want to just give you a few tips on catching fish that are feeding on extremely small shad. I know how frustrating that can be because when they're feeding on that little tiny shad, this is the time of the year where it seems like it happens most. Somewhere between September and Thanksgiving, fish always get on this really tiny shad and they get so focused on them and it's really hard to catch those fish. I have a few tricks that I've used over the years that I want to show you. Some of them you may have seen, some of them maybe you haven't, but I just want to share them with you and show you some of the tricks that I use to catch fish that are feeding on little tiny shad in the fall time. All right, so here's a couple of the baits that I like to use. Fish are feeding on small shad. They can be extremely difficult to catch, especially this time of the year. And I'm just going to show you a couple of little tricks. Actually, I forgot one of the tricks I'm going to show you here. And I'm going to show you a couple of the baits that I like to use. The fish are feeding on small shad and they get really difficult to catch. There's one there you probably wouldn't have thought about. But you can see most of these are soft plastic swim baits. This one right here, that's a Z-Man Slim Swims. That's a 3-inch bait. This is a 3-inch minnows right here. That particular bait. The difference in these two is one's a little bit fatter than the other. You can see this is a minnows. He's got a little bit more. It's got a little bit more booty on him. And the Slim Swims, just as the name suggests, it's got a lot smaller keel on it. This is a Streaks, which is like a fluke style bait. I'm also going to throw the good old nasty TRD in there. I'll show you. I got a little special way to rig it for fishing for bass that are feeding on small shad. Of course, a little smaller profile jerk baits as well. And obviously you'll notice there's a constant theme that everything has a shad pattern to it and some type of translucency. Obviously, if the fish are feeding on shad, you're probably going to want to use something that looks like shad for the most part. There's some times where you can kind of get out of the pocket and catch fish on baits that you can stand out by using some really bright colors. But let's just keep it simple. And for the most part, when I'm trying to catch fish that are feeding on small shad, let's stay in the shad category. Now, even though all of these baits are in the same category, same family, shad style baits, my approach with all of them are going to be totally different. You can see I've got a series of jig heads over here that I'm using for these baits, and each jig head is for a different plastic and for a different situation in my opinion. So I'll just start with the two that I use the most. This particular one right here with the eye on it, this one is it's actually made by Z-Man. This is a Z-Man Trout Eye. Now it has a lot thicker gauge hook than most of your swim bait jig heads that you're going to be using for finesse swim baits. But if I can get away with using like 12 to 15 pound tests, and I'm probably catching bigger fish. To be quite honest with you, this is the jig head that I use for saltwater the most because it has a good strong hook in it. That's not always going to be the best option. Most of the time, if you're having a tough time catching the fish, probably you're not going to be throwing bait casting equipment. You're not going to be using 15-pound test line. It's probably going to be 8 to 10-pound test line. And I found that this round ball jig head with a lighter wire hook is just a better option. And this particular head will work in all of these baits. Just a round ball jig head with a 90-degree line tie and a much lighter gauge hook. This is like a 3/16 to 3/8. It doesn't really matter what size. It just depends on where you're trying to put the bait at. But if I can get away with, a lot of times with catching striper and saltwater species, then I'm going to use this guy right here. But for the most part, this is the anomaly. I'm not going to really use it that much, but I like to show it off because it does pair well with all of these baits, including the Slim Swims. I'll show it to you here. It does have the double barbs. It's made specifically for Elastec products, so it just pairs up really well and stays on the jig head good. And that's what it would look like right there. I didn't rig it the best, but you can see it does have the right size hook for even a small swim bait like this one. So obviously you can pair any of the swim baits with the jig head here. This is This is an owner round ball, I think is the one I used. The only thing about the round ball jig head, you're going to have to use super glue on this because that plastic is going to slide down off of there because it doesn't have much of a collar there for your plastic. It's made more for a traditional plastic, so it doesn't have a lot of stickies around the edge of it. You can see this color is probably my favorite color of all my swim baits. Opening night has a real translucent bottom with little sparklies in it. Got the disco going on the back, and then it's got that smooth pearlescent top to it. I've actually, you'll be surprised how good this color shows up in all water clarities, from clear to like 10-foot visibility all the way to ordering 8 to 12 inches, because for some reason that the back on this particular color just shows up really well even in stained water. So it's probably my go-to color. I've caught more fish on this color swim bait than any other swim bait that I throw. But that's what it looks like. You just throw this guy out and reel it back. All right, so that's one that pretty much everybody has seen. I'll use the difference in the two. I'll use the Slim Swims, which is this one right here. When they're feeding on really small shad, this really does have a smaller profile, and the boot tail on the back of it, you can see it's a lot thinner than the minnows. The minnow has a much bigger boot tail. You see that? This one's going to have a lot tighter quiver. It's not as aggressive. That's super important. The biggest thing that you can remember when you're trying to catch fish that are feeding on smaller shad is a lot of action isn't always good, and these swim baits do a really good job of keeping a tight wiggle. This is another jig head that we came out with last year at Z-Man. This is the Finesse Eyes, and to be quite honest with you, I haven't put a lot of time in with this one, but man, I like the hook. I like the way it looks. But you can like what you're looking at all day, but until you spent some good time with it, it's really hard for me to get give you a good recommendation on when to use it. I do know this: it pairs up really well with all of these plastics. Just playing around with them, it has a good keeper on it. I like the way the plastic actually butts up to the head on this guy. You can see it looks actually better than any of the other jig heads. But the trick to catching these fish, a lot of times, is going to be doing something a little different. And this is, you can see this is just this is like a keel weighted hook with a little bit of flashy on the back of it. And sometimes that's the key to just getting the fish to bite. Maybe they won't bite just a regular jig head like that one. Maybe they won't bite that, but as soon as you go in here and put a little flash on it, that's how you get the strike. So try something different. This is I think they call this the Owner Flashy Swimmer. It comes with a screw lock. I usually take the screw lock off and throw it away. How you want to rig this guy is actually, I take the spinner off. So let me show you. I'll take the spinner off of this guy, and then I'll just Texas rig it. Take the spinner off, just twist it, turn that guy off, and I'll take my plastic. This seems to work best with the minnows, in my opinion, because you got more meat for that hook to set on. I'll just rig it like a normal Texas rig. Since this is elastic, you can push that. You can push this plastic. You'll be able to push it right over all of that funky hook weight and everything. This is a 3/16 ounce flashy swimmer here. And then you just put your hook in back like you're supposed to. Just Texas rig it like so. And then you take your blade that comes with it right here, and you just attach it back onto your bait. You take your blade and you just twist it back on your plastic, and then there it is. There's your flashy swimmer right here. That'll give you that little blade can sometimes trigger you a strike. That'll help you get a bite when they're feeding on that small shad, and they just need something a little different to trigger them in. All right, this guy right here, this is just a scrounger. This particular one's called a Buckeye Pulse Jig. I like it because it looks a little bit more lifelike, but you can use a regular scrounger too. Scroungers are pretty popular. One thing I like to do is put a snap on the line tie. I don't like to tie directly to the line tie like what you see here. I like to put the snap because it just gives it a little bit more room to work with. But this is the bait that I like to use with a Streaks. And this is something that I use when the water gets cold. Probably, let's say, obviously cold is relative to where you live, but let's say when the water gets definitely below the 60s, preferably in the 40s, and the shad can just be really, really, you know, they have a really tight, lazy wobble. They don't do a lot of booty shaking and none of that stuff. They're just a really tight wobble. That's when I'll start using this guy right here. This is the pulse jig. You notice it doesn't have any no boot tail or anything else. All your action is going to come from this lip that's around the head of the bait here. You can see it's got like this doggy collar type thing that they put around the head, and it's just got a really lazy wobble. This guy, when it comes through the water column, it just has a really, really shy wobble. And when they're feeding on shad and you can't get them to bite anything else, you throw this guy out there, slow roll it. A lot of times, depending on the water clarity, you can almost see this guy come all the way back to the boat. So that's another one of my little tricks that I like to use. This last one, I really hate to even show you this because not a lot of people talk about this, but you want a shad colored TRD. Okay, this is meat dog. You could say this is a shad color. You can rig it. Here's a cold piece about this: the TRD, you can rig it just like when they're feeding on small shad. You can rig it just like you would just going down the bank, right? Like how you would fish it normally. You can rig it. See, I jacked it all up there. You can rig it just like you normally would. All right? Just like that. That works. That'll catch them. Now, how the difference is how you're going to fish it. This is a great bait to catch fish suspended with that are feeding on shad, you know, over deep water, over 30, 40 foot of water, and just tight lining it back to the boat. This is a great bait to catch them on because you can throw it out and literally just hold the line tight if you see fish schooling on the surface, or just slowly reel it back to the boat. The reason being the lack of action. A lot of times we don't watch shad as they swim through the water. They actually don't have a lot of action. So many times shad just kind of they just move through the water and they don't have any action at all. But this guy can be deadly on schooling fish when they're feeding on small shad. Just a simple TRD on a Ned head. You have to use the appropriate weight so you can get right to the fish. The deal that I've noticed when you're fishing this guy is not to let it get below the school of fish. Fish in the fall time are almost always feeding up, so you want to keep it, you know, 5 to 10 foot above wherever the active fish are, and they'll come up to it and get it. So you can throw it out, slowly reel it back to the boat, and you also can use the spinners. Let me put the bait down here, and I'll show you. We have these spinners that you also can put in these baits as well. You see they have a little keeper right here, and you can put a spinner. Now this is a Colorado blade. They come in a Colorado blade and a willow leaf blade. And you can take them and just insert them right in the back end of the plastic, just like that. All right, and you've got a little bit of extra flash on the back of your spinner bait there. Now, if you've watched my YouTube before, you see my little boy and I. This is our favorite pond rig because this allows you to keep it up high. So if you're fishing over grass or something and fish are schooling over grass and you don't know what to throw, try this guy right here with the spinner, because then you can keep it up high. When you put that spinner on it, it won't sink down. You can keep it up real high and tight in water column. So that's a couple setups right there. And then I've got one other one, and that is smaller size jerk baits like this one. This is the Guggen. I want to say they call this the Junior Scout. I think this color right here is called Baby Bass, if I'm not mistaken. That's the Baby Bass color. And then the shad color. I actually like that Baby Bass color a lot. I probably use it more than any of the others. But you can see they have a really small, flat-sided shad pattern, and it cuts the water really good. So since it's flat-sided, you're going to have a lot of flash. That guy's going to flash. When fish are in more stained water and they're feeding on shad, real small shad, this is when I tend to like the hard baits over the soft plastic. You know, if you got some what I call green water, it's not really muddy, but it's definitely not clear. That's when I like to throw these smaller profile jerk baits. I think they're underrated, and it's just something about a jerk bait. They can't they can't seem to resist it. It's moving, it's jerking, and they really don't want it, but they got to hit it because it looks like a shad and it's stopping and going so fast. It creates a reaction bite. So definitely keep you a couple of smaller size jerk baits in the boat for this time of the year, so you can catch some of these fish that are feeding on shad this time of year. They stay up high in the water column, which is good. Which most of the time is going to be surface feeding. You're going to be visually seeing these fish school on shad, and these baits catch them really good too.